Today we have Nick Shaw here. He is the CEO of Renaissance Periodization. We are going to be talking about optimal nutrition for athletic performance. Nick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. So I run Renaissance. What we do is a lot of online coaching for diet and training programs. For the most part, we do a lot of diets for athletes in all of the sports. So, for example, we work with some, powerlifting clients. Probably most notably would be a couple of the juggernaut guys, Brandon Lilly and Chad Smith. Strongman, we have, Mike Caruso, pro strongman. I know he works with you guys a little bit too. He's actually one of our consultants as well. He has a PhD in, cellular and molecular biology, I believe, something like that. Real smart dude, and he's actually one of 5 PhDs that we have on staff that cover the sport of, the field of sports nutrition and sport physiology. So so we have powerlifting, strongman. We work with some top CrossFit athletes. We have an athlete going to the games. I'm actually heading out to the games next weekend, and we had a couple other clients win a few events at regionals, which is a pretty big deal. And then we have, some weightlifting clients as well. In fact, nationals is this weekend, and we have 6 clients competing there. So it's pretty cool. We kind of cover all the strength sports.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. So, first question I have for you is, for athletic performance, what do you think the best diet consists of?
Sure. So I'll just kind of give you a breakdown of, it's hard to say best just because it depends so much on each individual. Maybe a good example would be, if we're going to talk football, a diet for an offensive lineman is going to be a lot different than, say, a diet for a running back.
Right.
Most notably just because they probably weigh, 80 to 100 pounds difference. So that's kind of the first big thing. Everything's going to differ a little bit on, position, and obviously the sport's going to require a little bit of difference there too. A football player is going to eat a little bit different than, say, an endurance athlete. So, it's tough to sort of classify best because it's all going to be broken down into, positions, different sports and all that. But I guess, one of the major things is, best diet. So what's it going to sort of cover? Well, the first thing, you just have to be taking in enough calories, especially in season, to maintain your weight. What you don't want to have happen is while you're in season, you don't want to be losing weight. It's just going to impact performance in a negative manner. So you want to get calories covered first. Make sure those are covered, and you can sort of move on from there. The off season is probably a good time if you want to make, body composition changes to, say, lose weight or gain weight. A better time to do that is in the off season instead of focusing on that in season. Another good thing, so we kind of have calories covered there, is getting into the macronutrient breakdown.
Right.
A lot of carbs. Athletes are going to be eating a lot of carbs because, hey, the emphasis is on performance. So a lot of carbs are involved. So if you have college athletes who are wanting to eat paleo, it's probably not the best approach. And again, that's all going to depend on, body weight, physical activity. So if you're, let's say in August, you're doing 2-a-days in fall camp for football, man, you're going to be eating a lot of carbs. You could be up to as much as, say, 3 grams per pound of body weight. So if you're a 300-pound offensive lineman,
Right.
we're talking possibly, 900 grams of carbs. If you're, because these guys are probably lifting too, and then they're doing, 2-a-days a couple times a week, and they're almost working out every single day. So they're going to be eating a lot of carbs. That's definitely a big thing. But, you think about it, 900 grams of carbs, you go, wow. How do I go about that? Well, you're probably drinking a lot of Gatorade and all that during practice, right after practice, even before
Right.
practice. So all of a sudden, you're drinking several hundred grams of carbs a day. So it's not quite out of the, doesn't make it seem so impossible.
All right.
It's definitely kind of cover the calories, macronutrient breakdown. You're eating a lot of carbs, and those are sort of kind of the, what'll make the best diet. So I think that's probably a pretty good starting point, and then you can sort of focus on the finer details such as nutrient timing and food composition. Those are still important for sport performance, but a little less so after you cover the first two. Food composition would be the high GI versus low GI carbs, for example, or saturated versus unsaturated fats. Uh, for our purposes, probably, considering most college athletes, it seems, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, you probably work with a lot of college athletes yourself. The main thing is probably just getting them to eat enough food in general.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest problem we have.
Yeah. So, again, we're not going to focus so much on, getting super specific with nutrient timing and, hey, well, don't eat this, it's a saturated fat, or don't eat this, it's unsaturated fat. It's probably going to come down to just getting most of these athletes to eat in general,
Right.
to get enough calories to cover their, energy expenditure. Because, take that football player. I mean, 900 grams of carbs is 3,600 calories right there. That's not even including, fat intake and protein intake. So they're eating quite a bit. So,
Right.
will it be possibly some junk food, unclean foods? Yeah, absolutely, probably, in there.
Yeah.
You just have to get in those calories. So make sure that's kind of covered first, and that's a pretty good starting point from there. So.
All right. All right. Well, I mean, what would you tell athletes to make them understand the importance of their diet?
Sure. So, obviously, diet's important. How much of, how important is it in the short term? Let's take an example here of, maybe a track and field event, something like that, an event that lasts all day. Well, if, let's say you're not eating enough carbs, or you're not getting in enough fluids to stay properly hydrated, it's going to make an impact. Is that impact going to be huge? Likely not. But, in the short run, it's less of an impact. But let's say on, the weekly scale, it's going to start to add up a little bit more. And say over the month, suddenly those small, differences start to add up. And even more important, probably in the long run, so we're talking like a full season, those are when the changes really start to become noticeable. So let's say, if you're doing everything right, you're really sticking to a quality diet, and you can, let's say, gain a couple pounds of lean body mass per, year, so like your freshman year. Well, okay, maybe that's not a huge deal versus, someone you're competing against who stays the same. But all of a sudden, you take that over the course of a college career, and at the end, your senior year, you're up a net 8 to 10 pounds of lean body mass over someone you're competing against at the same
Right.
weight. Well, then it becomes a really big,
Right.
that's quite the competitive edge. So it definitely does play a role in the short term, but it starts to add up more and more in the long term, I'd say. So, it's definitely important, and kind of goes back to question number one that we talked about. Just getting your athletes to eat enough is probably the most important thing. And then, getting into, when you make body composition changes is pretty important too. And we can talk about that a little bit later on. But, try not to focus too much on that during the in-season. Try to get that done in the off-season. But even in that, because maybe you don't have direct access to the athletes, that can be pretty hard too. Because if they go home for the summer, you can tell them what to do online, but that can be tricky. So,
Right.
and you've probably come across that. You can send someone the best training program for the summer, but hey, man, they have to stick to it. You're not, seeing them every day or every other day to sort of stay on their case about it.
Yeah, they got to do it to actually get the benefits, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So when like, 'cause a lot of athletes don't know, what to do when they go to the shopping mart. So shopping on a budget. What do you suggest?
Yeah, cool. I'm pretty familiar with this, man. I had to work all through college to buy all my own food and all that, and pay for school. So it's tough, but it's probably one of my favorite topics to talk on. There's actually an article on your site. If anyone wanted to read that, they could read over that. But I'll kind of touch on a few points here. It's one of my favorite things to talk about because I get to sort of slam on organic foods a bit. So obviously, if you're on a budget, you're in college, money's tight. Do you need to start with eating, all natural foods or grass-fed beef, blah, 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 all that stuff? The answer, in short, is very simple: no. One, it's not worth it in terms of trade-offs there, because you're going to have to give up something else to spend that extra money. So if that something else you're giving up is more food, more calories, and you can't keep your weight up because you're trying to eat higher quality foods, well, that simply is just not a very good trade-off. And second, the evidence that those types of foods can improve body composition and, most importantly, sport performance, as that's what we're talking about, it is next to nothing. So right there, you can save a lot of money. And then I guess just going from there, just focus on the basics. So, focus on, buying in bulk, and that can save a lot of money. I know I shopped at Costco. In fact, when I was in college, I couldn't even afford a Costco membership. Well, I probably could have, but I would ride with my buddy to Costco probably about once a month and stock up on everything. So, that's certainly a really good route to save some money. Just focus on the basics, get your lean proteins covered. Things like milk, eggs, whole milk, whole eggs. Again, because we're focusing on keeping calories up as much as we can, and we're less concerned about, the fat that's involved in those. But it's actually a good way, per gallon of milk, it's quality protein, carbs, and fats in there. So it's sort of a lot of bang for your buck. So focus on the basic, your lean proteins covered. If you go back to thinking about what I wrote in the article, carbs and fats are pretty cheap, especially if you can get them at, Costco, buy them in bulk. I mean, man, you buy like a gallon jug of like olive oil. I mean, that'll last weeks or months, and it costs like $15. And you buy a couple boxes of pasta, and that should cover you a couple days. And something like powdered Gatorade. You don't have to buy the ready to drink stuff. You can buy the powdered Gatorade. It'll last you a lot longer, especially when you're on a budget and stuff. Those are probably just some general tips for eating on a budget. So, focus on the basics and don't worry about, getting the best quality foods. That's not to say you certainly can if you have the money laying around, but the trade-off's probably not worth it if you're on a limited budget.
Right. What advice would you give, coaches to educate, their athletes on nutrition?
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. So I'll just kind of hopefully talk about some general tips here. I kind of touched on this earlier, but during the season is not the time to probably make body composition changes, because think about it, you're training all year. Everything you're doing in the off season is to focus on the in season, on the actual competitions. So all of your focus in season is on performance and staying healthy, being able to perform on game day or whatever. So if you need to lose fat, you need to gain muscle, it's probably going to be best done in the off season. You have more time to devote to that, and like I said, you're not going to be wanting your weight to drop a lot in season, just because it's going to increase your fatigue, probably deplete your glycogen stores, and that's very likely going to lead to a subpar performance. So get all those changes done in the off season, and you're going to very likely be better off in season. Another thing, just to focus on if, you're trying to explain to athletes, some basics on sports nutrition. Eat a lot of carbs. We touched on this earlier, but, especially in season, you're going to want to keep your carbs pretty high. Same with protein, actually, because very likely in season, you're training a little bit less often with weights.
Right.
So what you don't want to do is drop your protein a lot and drop your calories a lot as well, because you're training less. So what that means is you're more likely to lose muscle, because if you're not training as much and you're eating less protein and carbs. So that's another good thing to touch on. Make sure the athletes are eating enough protein and carbs, especially post-workout, especially on workout days. Make sure your athletes are eating a lot of carbs. Again, around the workout, it's probably a very good idea to be drinking some Gatorade and whey protein, especially after training. Even after practice, that's a good idea. Around actual competitions, the protein component there is a little less important, so it's going to be really important to get a lot of carbs in, because again, everything you do is for that specific game day. Everything's leading up to that. So when it comes to protein and carbs around, let's say weight training, the focus is to set the stage for optimal recovery. But again, that's sort of all focusing on the competition. Well, when it comes to the competition, that's sort of the meat and potatoes, so to speak. So, the protein's a little less important there. It's all about focusing on what can I do to perform the absolute best on this given day.
Right.
So everything else is sort of setting the stage for that, but when it comes to the actual performance day, a lot of carbs. And this is the case, if you have like weekend tournaments. So let's say you have like a volleyball tournament and it's a multiple day thing. focusing on getting your athletes to eat a lot of carbs, especially at night when they're done, when glycogen stores are depleted a lot. Actually, I have a pretty good story. My colleague, Dr. Israel, worked at East Tennessee State. He was sports nutritionist for the volleyball team there, and he had a good story about they were at their conference championships, and I don't mean to just slight their team at all, but they probably weren't the most talented team there. Like, there was another team in the league that was probably a little more traditionally, maybe had, I don't know, better recruits, higher recruits, something like that. But through the application of sports nutrition principles, they actually went on to win the tournament that year. And certainly the sports nutrition aspect played a role, because what they would actually do is when their athletes got done with the matches for that day, they literally sat there and made them drink like a thing or two of Gatorade, and they had to eat like a bunch of bread and all that. So they had to get in all those carbs, and they literally watched them, they monitored them, and they made sure they ate them. And guess what? They performed really well that whole weekend, and they won.
Right.
So, that goes back to how important is it? Well, it can certainly play a role. In a one-day competition, maybe less so, but over a several-day competition, it can certainly add up pretty quick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of carbs. It's a multi-day event. Lots of carbs to restore glycogen as well. So those are all pretty important aspects. And just some, sort of real-life application tips. And these are literally straight from the slides of a class that Dr. Zertel taught on sports nutrition.
All right.
All this is sort of, theoretical, like this is best case, but, when it really comes down to it, that's where we get to, make sure they're eating a lot, make sure they're eating enough. It's not always going to be the best, quality foods. And, you kind of have to stay on the college athletes. You're an 18, 22-year-old athlete, probably have pretty good genetics, you're playing sports in college, probably been able to get by, in high school and stuff on your genetics talent alone. So you got to really stay on the athletes, make sure they're getting in the food. Don't let them train on an empty stomach. Make sure they're eating, a lot of carbs around the workouts, especially around the actual games, competitions. If you can't get them to follow everything specifically to a T, at least make sure they're drinking some type of sports drink, during practice, during training, during games. Those are all tips that are going to help as well. If we have sports that are a little more focused on strength and power, say something like football versus something like cross country, the sports like cross country are probably going to require a little less protein and more carbs. So, if you have a 140-pound endurance runner, they're probably eating a little bit less protein than, say 140-pound. 140 pounds is pretty light for, let's say, a football player, but it's a rough example. They're going to be eating a little bit more protein, a little bit less carbs likely, and not going to be eating a ton of carbs. So, there's kind of some real-world tips, I guess. And, I guess if you have any other questions or anything you'd like to cover.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time out of your day to, come on the show and the Superset series. Is there any last minute info that you'd like to give athletes, give coaches on what their athletes should do, this and that? If you got it, we'd love to hear it. If you
Sure.
if you got something else.
Luckily, my colleague Dr. Israel, he's the one that has all the slides, and he's taught sports nutrition, and we even have a PhD in sports nutrition on staff. She's actually a world champion grappler too in jiu-jitsu, so she really knows her stuff. But you can just go online and search for Renaissance Periodization, and we have a lot of free information on our YouTube channel that covers the nutritional basics and all that, and a lot of other training videos as well. So you can definitely check that out for a little more information, and hit us up online if you have any questions. If you know any of the strength conditioning coaches, if they have more specific questions, they can feel free to sort of reach out anytime, and we'll do our best, because all of us are athletes ourselves, and we've been there and sort of been through the battle, so to speak. So.
Besides the fact, I just like to tell everybody, Nick has been incredibly open to me. He has opened the doors of communication on any question I have for him. He has great information. Renaissance Periodization, they give good information to anybody who needs it. I mean, they're not gonna beat down your door and ask you for money either. They're there. They want to give you guys good information. So if anybody has any questions, anything they want to apply to teams, please feel free to message Nick, right? Message Dr. Israel and get a hold of Renaissance Periodization. They do a great job.
I guess one more last thing. We actually have an ebook that's probably coming out in like a month or two, and that's going to be a really good read. It's going to be really in depth, and it'll literally break down like exactly how to break down your diet, according to physical activity and all that. So look for that in a month or two, and it's certainly not going to be super expensive. So it'll be a pretty good resource for a strength and conditioning coach who wants to get his athletes to sort of perform better or improve their body composition.